Hello there. Whilst the Remainers still dream of dragging us back to the good old days of a UK fully wedded to the European Union, what many of them do not realise is that the EU now has other plans, and none of these came up during last year's referendum. As a Leaver, you may not be interested in what the EU gets up to, but with Remainers still trying to argue us back in, you should be aware of what the EU really wants to do, as opposed to what the Remainers will try and tell us. During the run-up to the EU referendum last year, the Remainers portrayed the EU as a sort of set-in-concrete deal. We were led to believe, or at least the gullible were, that the EU had now become what it wanted to be, and that there would be no future change, no more integration. In fact, we were told that the UK would be able to sort of negotiate and forge its own way. But we soon found out the truth when David Cameron came back with nothing despite his months of wandering the EU, looking in vain for people who would listen to him. Now the Remainers are trying to tell us that we can somehow just slip back into the EU and everything will be exactly as it was before, forevermore. But that's one big fat whopper. The EU Parliament has recently published a document called Future of Europe. European Parliament sets out its vision. The first thing for me to get out of the way is that it always sticks in my craw when they refer to anything EU as European. It's not a European Parliament. It should be called the Parliament of the European Union, far more accurate, especially after we've reduced it somewhat. Secondly, and this is really the point to note, the manuscript was completed in October this year. It's hot off the press. It is the new EU way ahead. One bit I did find a little humorous though was the heading of the first section. Europeans expect protection from the EU. I wonder if they actually meant to say that. But the rest of the document shows the direction the EU is now intent on taking, and I think that the vote to leave the EU would have been nearer the 80% mark had this been published before the referendum. This vision of the EU Parliament in this document basically follows the Jean-Claude Juncker and Emmanuel Macron model of more Europe. And to reinforce that whole point, both Juncker with his State of the Union address and Macron's Initiative for Europe are quoted throughout. All those who said that more EU federalisation was not on the cards, or worse still, that it was some sort of scare story, have now been proved comprehensively wrong. This Future for Europe piece has been signed off by the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, and talks of nothing other than more power to the EU institutions, whilst claiming that the latest public opinion survey gave them that mandate. In this document it says that Parliament advocates changes that do not require treaty changes. Let's take a look at some of these, shall we? The Council of Ministers should become a second legislative chamber and use qualified majority voting whenever possible. This would, as far as I'm concerned, devalue the say of nation-states in EU lawmaking processes. The setting up of a permanent Council of Defence Ministers, which ties in with later statements in the document about a European Defence Fund, Permanent Structured Cooperation, or PESCO as it is more generally known, and Defence Union, where Parliament wants to establish the European Armed Forces capable of deploying combat forces for high-intensity conflicts, stabilisation forces which secure ceasefires or peace agreements, and evacuation tasks, medical services including mobile field hospitals, as well as forces for military logistics and military engineering. This, of course, backed up by Juncker's call in his State of the Union address in September for a fully fledged defence union by 2025, and Macron's Initiative for Europe call for a European initiative and a fully deployable European armed force by the beginning of the next decade. Anyone remember Nick Clegg trying to claim this would never happen in a debate with Nigel Farage? Nigel was dead right. Clegg was dead wrong. One point to note is that, even though this vision was finalised over a year after the Brexit vote, it still calls for the France-UK defence cooperation to be brought into the EU framework. That could include nuclear stockpile stewardship in support of both countries' independent nuclear deterrent capabilities. And this defence fund, who's paying? Is it extra to the amount we spend under NATO agreements, or is the plan that this EU fund replaces NATO? Moving on, the document says that MEPs propose the creating of the posts of EU Finance Minister and EU Foreign Minister, as well as establishing a European Monetary Fund, exactly mirroring Juncker's earlier wishes. It also says it wants to end Europe à la carte, which means getting rid of nation-state opt-ins and opt-outs. I wonder how the UK opt-out of the euro would fit in here. The document also advocates all asylum applications being dealt with centrally by the Common European Asylum System as part of a binding mechanism for the fair distribution of asylum seekers among all EU member states. There is much more in that document, which I have put a link to in the description box below. When Juncker gave his State of the Union address and Macron came out in support of his views, many people just dismissed them. But I did warn that people like these do not make speeches without purpose, and we are now seeing it all come together. An EU with more power over its citizens. Do not be taken in by transition periods and the like. We need a clean break, and it needs to be now. What do you think? Please leave a comment below. Thank you. Please do like and share this video, and also subscribe to my channel. And when subscribing, please do remember to press on the little bell next to the subscribe button. That way you'll get an alert every single time I put up a new video. Thank you very much for watching.